The work of CCVO takes place in the land of peoples from Treaties 6, 7, and 8. Today I am on the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 people, the Blackfoot from Kainai, Blood, Siksika, and Pagan, the Sarsi from Tsuut'ina and Eden Valley, and the Stoney Nakoda people from Morley. This land is also home to the people of Métis Nation of Alberta. Whether we are Indigenous or settlers, residents or visitors on this land, we are all treaty people. Welcome to the CCVO Capacity Building Webinar Series. I'm Tracy Braun, Manager of Programs here at CCVO. This series is focused on topics that help nonprofit professionals and the organizations they work with build their capacity and strengthen their impact. Thank you to our sponsors, Land Solutions and Altitude Communications, for your ongoing support of the CCVO webinar series. If you're watching this webinar live, we encourage you to post your questions in the question box, which will be on the right of your screen, and Matt will get to your questions at the end of the presentation. For this webinar on how to manage an underperforming employee, we're joined by Matt Ewens of Human Elements Canada Limited. Matt is an HR professional who's founded a boutique consulting firm in 2017 that works with do-gooders regarding strategic planning, capacity building, and workplace culture. In October 2020, Matt became the interim executive director of the Hillhurst Sunnyside Community Association, and he has had he's held a chartered professional in human resources, a CPA-HR degree designation, since 2010. Thanks for joining us today, Matt.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction.
You're welcome.
So I guess it's all me now. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I hope everyone is healthy and happy to be on yet another webinar. Hopefully, this webinar will not only be providing you with information, but I'm hoping it won't be one of the least ranked webinars that you've attended this year so far. So having said that, welcome to Stop the Cycle, otherwise known as How to Manage Underperforming Employees. Now, the four things when we built this slide or this presentation that we really wanted attendees to come away with is learning number one is the true cost. So really, what is the true cost to employee termination and turnover when things go bad between the employee and the employer? Learning number two is a tool that we're going to be spending a lot of time in today called progressive corrective action. And this really is an effective and tested and true approach to performance issues in the workplace, and not just like dealing with, oh, that problem employee. Learning number three is actually getting to the core. So using progressive corrective action, how to actually identify and resolve the core issue. So you're not just putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg, you're actually dealing with the underlying root cause. And learning number four, working together. How to actually work together with your employee to address these core issues. Now, having said all of that, this webinar was originally supposed to take place way back before the current COVID-19 pandemic really took hold here in North America. So between then and now, we've been dealing with lockdowns, hashtag work from home movement, workplace safety measures that appear to be changing on, a very consistently inconsistent basis, potential layoffs or layoffs that have already happened. I think one of the last pieces of information I saw from CCVO was that 20% of Albertan nonprofits are thinking about permanently closing their doors. So we really are dealing with very much a unique time right now in this sector, and that's put a little bit of a different lens on today's presentation. Whenever you'll see it looks cute when it's small, but whenever you see this little novel coronavirus up in the top right-hand corner, that's probably a really good reminder to me to kind of talk about how the different styles of work and how our workplace cultures have changed with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. So, leading in a VUCA world, some of you may be familiar with this term. VUCA world, really it boils down to
Matt, we seem to have lost your audio.
I do apologize. Is that working now?
Yes, we're good to go.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. Let me just recap this. Leading in the VUCA world, really it comes down to that today's world is a massive societal change. Complex and powerful technologies are taking hold, and we have worldwide crises. And there's a quote that I like to butcher, which is, the world is never going to be as slow as it is today. Effectively, tomorrow is always going to be faster than it is today with everything that's taking place in our societies. But what does actually VUCA mean? Well, it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And really, volatility comes down to how people, markets, countries, even artificial intelligence react to particular situations. Whereas uncertainty, that's information about upcoming events is unknown or difficult to predict. We saw leading up to the election down south earlier this month, how complete districts were boarding up all of their storefronts. That was a reaction to the uncertainty of a potentially volatile situation. Complexity, really that's the interdependence and interconnectedness of different aspects of a system. So a really fun sort of mapping exercise for you and your team to potentially do is just map out something simple like, how do you make toast? What systems need to be in place for you to simply make toast in the morning? And you can go pretty deep into that process, and you'll actually probably find how complex making toast actually is. And then ambiguity. So this is not the same as uncertainty, rather ambiguity sort of arises despite the fact that proper information is available to make decisions, and yet the path forward is still unclear. So with that, let's now go back to our regularly scheduled program and into the main set of slides that we originally connected. And again, keep an eye out for that little virus in the top right-hand corner. So, SCARD management. I'm not sure where everyone here is in their leadership journey, but nobody is a leader long without learning some lessons from how to interact with employees, whether that's leading them, correcting and managing their behaviors and your expectations. Some have scars that we hold deep inside, and some, like this poor fellow, actually have them on the outside. So let's take a quick look at true costs. So when the relationship between employer and employee goes really wrong, what are some of the true costs? Well, we have kind of two main categories here: organizational costs and then average financial costs. From an organizational cost perspective, you've got team morale. Team morale could be low due to the fact that this individual is not pulling their weight, leadership's not doing anything, or it could be that this position has been vacant for a really long time. You also have costs with respect to actually interviewing if you're replacing the role. Of course, then hiring the individual, training that individual. And of course, all of this, you probably have reduced productivity. Reduced productivity when the employee is onboarded. But then you also have lost opportunity costs when it comes to your focus has been on trying to solve potentially the behaviors that you're seeing with the employee, but now you're having to fill the employee because the employee has left the organization. That's taking away from other things. And then you've got overworked remaining staff, whether they were covering while this position remained vacant, or while the new employee is coming up on to actually understand what their role is and coming up to par. You could have overworked remaining staff. Now, when it comes to average financial costs, I'm not going to be able to give you down to the cent, but here are some average pieces of information, and I do have a link to the source below. So, of course, you've got the severance or termination pay if applicable, and on average, at least this study found that for an entry-level employee, it takes about 60% of the annual salary to replace that employee. For mid-level, you're looking at 20%. And for actual high-level or highly specialized employees, it could be over 200% of their annual salary to replace. So, planning for discipline. So I truly believe that most employees want to do a good job when they get up every day, and that you, as the manager, leader, supervisor, you can help your employees succeed by doing 5 things. Orientation, so providing a detailed orientation for new employees. Setting clear expectations, so establishing those clear expectations for behavior and performance in the workplace. Training, provide training, coaching, and mentoring to your employees. Feedback, and not just feedback, but timely feedback through appropriate supervision. And then the last one is implementing an appropriate performance management process. Now, you got that little coronavirus up here because, of course, things may have changed drastically for you with respect to how your work gets done. And you can almost kind of think of this little virus as an asterisk, because we kind of have a COVID asterisk on everything that we're doing these days. Some organizations may have the luxury and be in the position to be able to work remotely. Some organizations may not have that luxury for the majority of their employees. So this 5-step process may change depending on the situation that you find yourself in. But at the end of the day, this is extremely good foundational material for you to build a successful workplace culture on top of. So, planning for discipline. Now, I don't know if any of you have been on the receiving end of somebody like this, or maybe some of you have actually been someone like this in the past. But despite your best efforts, you will come across some employees who fail to meet your expectations for performance or behavior. So this is where I hope you will have, 1, an unbiased approach to dealing with underperforming employees. 2, the ability to invest more time into the individual employee. And 3, the patience to do it right. So let's say we have those 3 things. Let's take a look. So as an organization, much like safety planning, if you've ever been a part of any safety planning, you want to plan for how to respond to underperforming employees rather than, you know what, we'll cross that bridge, or we'll deal with that situation if it arises. So here are a few questions that your organization could be asking itself. What types of behavior or outcomes will result in immediate termination of employment? Does the manager, supervisor of the employee need approval from somebody else in order, from somebody else in the organization during the discipline process? Is there a code of conduct that supports the disciplinary process? Is there an appeals process? What about, is there a policy that clearly states the number of verbal or written warnings before an escalation is required? Are there different lengths of discipline or suspension? Can a suspension happen without being preceded by a warning? Is the employee allowed to have a third party or witness in the room or during the discussion, their leader? What if the behavior performance is actually the result of a medical condition? Can an employee ever get a clean slate? If so, how much time has to pass? And is it different based on the severity of the performance behaviors? So I'd like to show a model here. And some of you may be very familiar with this, either from the employee perspective or the leader perspective. So what we have here is the employee performance in steel gray over time, and then we have the leader frustration over time in, I don't know, rusty red. And then the dotted line is acceptable performance. So as you can see, over time, the employee performance is going down and it drops beneath acceptable performance. And you can also see that the leader frustration sort of mirrors the employee performance. So as the employee performance goes down over time, the leader frustration goes up over time. Now, I'd be very curious what you think right now might be the cause for both of these trends. But a question I have is, what happens when we get here? Well, in my experience, the usual outcome is the leader's like, that's it, I've had it, get them out. But now when we think about the employee, what do we think the employee's thinking? Well, they probably don't want to get out of bed in the morning. Probably think, my leader doesn't care about me. I don't think I'm doing a good job. I don't think I'm of value to the organization. They don't value me because no one has been talking to me about this, and this has been an issue for a really long time. You could also look at the employee performance as maybe the team morale as well. If an issue is not being addressed over a long period of time, and everybody on the team sees this, you could be having morale or even team performance go down over time. So this is what I call the mighty zone. This is where you might be able to save the relationship between the employer and the employee. So if at this point the leader makes a significant course correction with the employee, you might be able to save this. But the best, absolute best time is obviously earlier on in the time frame that we're looking at here. So timely interventions by leaders to restore the employee performance are crucial. I really look at this as, you know, you're standing at the top of a mountain, and there's this beautiful little mountain village down below, and a couple of pebbles move, and you have the ability to put your hand on those pebbles and all is well. But if you don't stop those pebbles, they slide down and they slowly pick up, you know, twigs and larger rocks, and then eventually we've got logs and boulders, and then, you know, forests, and everything comes sliding down and then does significant damage to the village below. The same thing goes for when there is a performance deviation by an employee. The sooner that you can address it, the sooner you can put in corrective actions, you have a higher chance of a better outcome. So I also want to talk about employee performance versus acceptable performance, and kind of two quick things I just want in the back of your head. So again, we've got the dotted line is acceptable performance, and we've got employee performance. So we've got two models here. And what's the difference between these two models? Well, you can see that they both end with the employee performance underneath acceptable performance. But in the first instance, the employee knows what it's like to perform adequately, and chances are the leader has seen this. And in the second, the employee has never known what it's like to perform adequately. So they could be brand new to the company. Maybe they've been put into a brand new role in a different team, reporting to a different person with completely different job description, and they've never known what it's like to perform adequately in that job. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there, because chances are, if you do have a timely intervention in the first case, you could probably restore performance. However, who knows? Maybe the individual in the second scenario is not actually capable of performing where you need them to perform. So at the end of the day, there's no magic wand to improving an employee's performance. You both have to care, and you both have to work it out. Otherwise, things will go bad one way or another. So let's talk about progressive discipline. So, oh, great, the subject matter expert is putting up a dictionary definition. Fantastic. Well, let's take a look at this. So the dictionary is saying progressive, increasing in extent or severity. And discipline, an orderly or prescribed conduct of pattern or behavior. So progressive discipline is also known to HR professionals and some folks in the business world as corrective action. And they can include things such as a performance improvement plan. But nobody likes the term discipline, so let's instead refer to it as progressive corrective action. So our definition of progressive corrective action, or PCA, is orderly corrective actions to manage a negative pattern of behavior which increases in severity as the situation demands. And let's be very clear. Progressive corrective PCAs, it's easier to say, is not about pointing fingers at an employee. It is there to correct. It is certainly not there to punish. So let's take a look at just a simple model here, just to kind of show what the progressive piece means. So in the blue or the gray, we have the employee performance concern, and then orange, we have leader initiated corrective action. So some kind of performance deviation has occurred. The leader has a conversation. Hey, we need to fix this. Let's resolve this issue and let's move on. Behavior either continues or it gets worse. So now there's been a progressive step up Now it's a little more formal, it's in written format, but again, the behavior continues or it gets worse. There's a greater impact. So again, we step up, and then again, we get to the third level. So that's what we're looking at when we're talking about the progressive nature. So it may not seem like, Matt, simple 7-step process. Well, it actually is. And this process will help you identify your issues clearly. It promotes collaboration between the parties. It requires both parties in order to succeed. And it can actually foster greater trust between management and the employee. And eventually it will solve the issue one way or another, hopefully in the more positive manner. So the 7 steps we have is performance concern, impact in the workplace, contributing factors, actions for the employee, actions for management, follow-up, and consequences. So this might be a little bit difficult to see on your screens right now, but this is the progressive corrective action form. And at the very top, you have basic organizational details like the employee name, the leader name, the date, if there's an employee ID, is this a first written, second, third, what's the length of the corrective action? And in the middle, we have those 7 steps that we just spoke about. And then at the very bottom, we have signatures and dates of the leader and of the employee. So let's take a look at progressive corrective action in action. So the case that we're looking at is Elaine, and she is late for work again. So Elaine Johnson is a 2-year employee working for a small nonprofit with Manish Patel as executive director. Elaine's main responsibility is acting as the office administrator, which also includes answering the main phone line and during non-COVID times, greeting visitors at the office's entrance. Elaine has been late greater than 30 minutes for 3 shifts in the past month. The first 2 times, Elaine did not let Manish know that she would be late. However, the 3rd time she did text Manish. When Elaine is late, others in the office have to cover her duties. It's really starting to get to Manish. That frustration level is starting to go up, and it's annoying the team. Elaine had a verbal conversation regarding the same issue with Manish about 6 months ago. So that's the situation that we're looking at right now. So this is the progressive corrective action that Manish put together before he took this webinar. So I'm calling this a poor progressive corrective action. At the very top, we can see that the employee name, leader name is there. It's a first written, and the date is November 10th. Okay. The performance concern, Elaine has been coming in late. The impact to the workplace, this annoys me. Identification of contributing factors, Elaine is lazy. Actions to take by the employee, Elaine is to come in on time or she's fired. Actions to take by the leader, speak to Elaine, nothing under follow-up, and consequences should the performance concern not be properly addressed, fired. And there's a signature by Manish, no date, and nothing from the employee. So obviously I would imagine that everybody out there looking at this is saying that's not a real progressive corrective action, and it's not. But I just wanted to kind of show an example here. So let's actually take a look at the 7 steps, and then we'll be incorporating them into our current case. So step 1, identify the performance concern. So make sure you have the facts and be as detailed as possible, you know, the who, what, where, when, why, how type stuff. So let's take a look with Elaine. So identify the performance concern. Elaine has been late greater than 30 minutes for 3 shifts in the past month. Elaine was late on October 12, 2020, 45 minutes late, no phone call or warning. October 18, 2020, 35 minutes late, no phone call or warning. October 3rd, 2020, 30 minutes late, texted at 5 minutes past starting time that she would be late. So those are the performance concerns. Now, number 2, impact to the workplace. So when you're going through this, ask yourself questions about how this performance concern is impacting you and the workplace. So was a customer, stakeholder, client impacted? How? What has the actual impact to the workplace been? Has the team been impacted, and how? Was there a financial loss? Was it a small, big loss? Was there damage to a company asset? How bad is it? So really, you're just trying to get what the actual impact to the workplace is based on the actions and behaviors shown by the employee. So let's take a look at with Elaine here. So number 2, impact to the workplace. Elaine's lateness has impacted the team as her teammates and I have to scramble to cover her position until she arrives. This reduces our ability to effectively handle client and stakeholder inquiries and takes away others from their own responsibility. So we've now done the performance concern, impact to the workplace. Let's take a look at contributing factors. So asking yourself and the employee about possible contributing factors to the performance concern is really important. So what could have enabled this concern? What could have brought this concern on? And it's not about assigning blame at this point, rather it's about understanding the whole picture. So ask yourself questions like, was management at fault? Was a procedure not known? Was the employee distracted? Are there employee issues that leadership is not aware of? And there's a little COVID virus up in the top right-hand corner. There could be a lot of contributing factors right now to unexpected or lower performance from employees right now. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but there's a lot of stress out there, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but we all react to stress in different ways, and we may not know what's going on at home. Or is that work these days? I don't know. We used to work from home, but now we're living from work. So it's really important to understand what these contributing factors are. So let's take a look at with Elaine. Elaine has mentioned that her power keeps going off in her neighborhood and that her alarm clock is affected. Okay, so that is what Elaine is saying with respect to her coming in late. So now we look at what are the actions the employee can take to address or resolve the performance concern. So maybe the employee needs to take a specific action, maybe they need to take and pass certain training, maybe they need to read a policy. There could be all sorts of things actions that employees should be taking. But pro tip here is make sure to ask the employee what actions they can take. You might be completely surprised, but what they have to say, things that you may not have thought of. So let's take a look at actions for Elaine. So there's 2 actions here. Elaine is to ensure that her alarm clock has a backup battery installed and that her cell phone is to be used as a secondary alarm clock. Elaine is to call Manish on his cell phone. Here is Manish's cell phone number as soon as she knows she's going to be late for work. Texts and voicemails are not acceptable. It must be a conversation. So 2 very clear and specific actions. So now, actions for management. So you can ask yourself, just like you did with the employee, what actions you as the leader can take to help resolve the performance concern. So taking a look at the contributing factors, they could be things like, well, maybe you need to assign and approve certain training. Maybe you need to present a policy to the employee. Maybe you need to give the employee other specific actions. But what I have seen over and over again is that successful progressive corrective actions, there's quite a few that have leader actions mirroring actions for the employee. So if the employee needs to take specific training, then the leader needs to approve and allow that specific training to happen. Does that make sense? So let's take a look at actions for management. So remind Elaine of her responsibilities as an employee to be fit, able, and available for the start of her shift, and to answer her smartphone if she's able. So Manish will answer his smartphone if he is able. So if he's driving, he's not going to be answering the phone. So follow up. Everything's sorted, right? You've identified the issues, you've spoken about the actions that need to correct. What else do you need? Well, depending on the severity of the performance deviation, you may need to follow up for several months after, 6 months after, a year after, or you may have no follow-up whatsoever. So questions to ask is it important to follow up on this issue? What are you following up? When are you following up on the matter? Who's going to be booking the meeting or the conversation? And then how many times will you be meeting? So these are really important things. If it's a very low level matter, you may only need one meeting. If it's a very serious matter that had a major impact to the workplace or even outside of the workplace, this may be something that you're going to be following up on for a long period of time. So let's take a look at this case. In this case, Elaine is to book a meeting with Manish after 15 days, so about 2 weeks, to discuss how the new system is working and if any further changes are needed to be made. So, consequences, step 7. So what happens if at the end of the progressive corrective action, the performance deviations or the behaviors are not resolved? Well, here are some examples. So if it's a verbal, you first had a verbal conversation, and this is very serious language, but failure to properly address the performance concern as discussed will result in an escalation to a first written progressive corrective action. And then as we continue, if it's a first minor written, very similar language, result in an escalation to a second written. And second, same thing, very similar language, but now we're getting into sort of a more medium seriousness, will result in a third written progressive corrective action. And then if you fail your third written progressive corrective action, so failure to properly address the performance concern during the length of the PCA will result in termination for cause. Now, it's a big asterisk there, termination for cause. You should always, 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 always check with your HR department, your HR consultant, your legal representative before attempting termination for cause. Now, if progressive corrective action is carried out properly in conjunction with other evidence that you have, let's say you've got meticulous leader notes, you've got all sorts of information that you've been trying so hard to correct this performance matter, the employee has been given every opportunity to turn things around, correct the performance behaviors, then it should allow for such an action. However, another course of action could be severance. It really just does depend on how well things have been implemented, how well your HR and legal teams, how comfortable they are with the course of termination for cause. So big asterisks there for you. So step 7 for Elaine. So failure to properly address the performance concern during the length of the progressive corrective action will result in an escalation to a second written PCA. So this is the original progressive corrective action that Manish put together. But let's take a look at now that we've gone through each of the 7 steps. So here we have, if we look at the very top, you've got the names for both the employee, the leader. It's a first written. Here's the date. Here's Elaine's employee ID, and the length of the progressive corrective action is 1 month. So that's been identified. We actually have the performance concern summary. So Elaine has been late greater than 30 minutes for 3 shifts in the past month. Elaine was late on October 12, 45 minutes, no phone call or warning. October 18, 35 minutes, no phone call or warning. November 3rd, 40 minutes late, texted at 5 minutes past starting time that she would be late. Impact to the workplace. Elaine's lateness has impacted the team as her teammates and I have to scramble to cover her position until she arrives. This reduces our ability to effectively handle client and stakeholder inquiries and takes others away from their own responsibilities. Identification of contributing factors. Elaine has mentioned that power keeps going off in her neighborhood and that her alarm clock is affected. Okay, so the actions that the employee will take, ensure her alarm clock is effectively power outage proof, is to ensure that a backup battery is installed and that her smartphone is to be used as a secondary alarm clock. And Elaine is to call Manish on his smartphone. Here is the telephone number. As soon as she knows that she's going to be late for work, and texts and voicemails are not acceptable, it must be a conversation. Actions for Manish, the leader. Remind Elaine of her responsibilities as employee to be fit, able, and available for the start of her shift, and he will answer his smartphone if he is able. Follow-up schedule. Elaine is to book a meeting with Manish after 15 days to discuss how the new system is working and if any further changes need to be made. And the consequences, should the performance concern not be properly addressed. Failure to properly address the performance concern during the length of the PCA will result in an escalation to a second written PCA. But Matt, I hear you say, what happens if we do all of this and it still goes wrong? Well, of course, we live in a perfect world, so it should not go wrong. It should end with everybody holding hands. Well, maybe not holding hands in COVID times, but everybody feeling comfortable and happy. Of course, we don't live in a perfect world. So what happens if the performance concern is not resolved by the end of the progressive corrective action? So here are a couple of questions to help guide your actions. What went wrong? Were the contributing factors not appropriately identified? So here is my little asterisk. And this also is involved with sort of COVID as well. So we'll take a look through the non-COVID lens and then the COVID lens. In my experience, for contributing factors that employees are hesitant to talk about, whether that's from feeling ashamed of a certain situation, or they're trying to, maybe they're not being honest with themselves about a situation, they will not most likely put the proper contributing factor in right away, if it's a verbal or if it's like the first written. If the consequences start to get very serious, you may see that the contributing factors change. So for instance, with Elaine, maybe the first is my alarm, right? That's why I'm late. But then she continues to be late, and well, really it's, my car broke down, and I got a flat tire as well the second time I was late. And but then as consequences get more and more serious, maybe it turns out that there is, and hopefully there's a high enough level of trust between the employee and the leader for a safe conversation to happen. But maybe there's significant issues with respect to childcare. Maybe there is some form of domestic violence that is taking place. Maybe there's some form of substance abuse or some form of addiction that is an issue. You may get to true contributing factors, but sometimes an employee just won't go there, and they would rather go through the entire step and then be exited from the organization without having to actually say specific words. So it is really difficult, but very important to appropriately identify the contributing factors. Now, the COVID lens, stress levels are up, cortisol levels are up. You may not know what's happening in your employee's personal life. Perhaps they have a partner that works in a hospital and they're effectively isolated in the basement. They never get to see their partner except for through FaceTime or Zoom or what have you. Their partner has to change their clothes before coming into the house and then change their clothes once again and jump in a shower right away. Perhaps there's issues with COVID appearing in an employee's children's school. Perhaps an employee has a loved one in an aging care home. There could be all sorts of things. Perhaps the employee does not like working remotely and really enjoys having a warm and friendly workplace that they get to work and be surrounded by their coworkers. So there could be lots of things happening with that COVID lens. And so it really is important to identify contributing factors. But moving on, did the employee not follow certain actions? More importantly, did the leadership not follow their actions? If one of the pieces, an action an employee is supposed to take is that they require to go and take a certain piece of training, and the leader doesn't set that up and doesn't approve it, how is that the employee's fault? I don't know about salsa, but I hear it takes two to tango. And so in this case, it really is important that both parties be involved and both follow up on their actions. Perhaps the same behavior did happen, but under different circumstances. So if we take a look at the example with Elaine, the original piece is Elaine is late because power is going off. But, the second time around that Elaine is late after having this first written PCA, flat tire. Really, the impact to the workplace is the same. The behavior is the same. It's the employee not showing up on time to be able to take their role on. The contributing factors and the different circumstances are sort of secondary. So it is the employee and the leader, they need to figure out how can we get the employee to fulfill their obligations. Maybe something interfered with the progressive corrective action, like maybe vacation. Maybe the employee had to go away for, they had 2 weeks or 3 weeks of holiday booked, or even the leader, and some actions weren't able to be undertaken. So if it does fail, or if the progressive corrective action does not change the performance behaviors, is an escalation appropriate then? So I know we said that we were going to escalate from a first written to a second written, but maybe an extension is appropriate instead. So if Elaine went away on vacation for 2 weeks, maybe we're not going to escalate, but we're going to do an extension for a further 2 weeks. So tips. So how to have a confident, productive PCA conversation. So a distraction-free environment. This is probably not news to most of you. So have the meeting, whether it's a verbal or written meeting, in a quiet, preferably closed environment. So a private office or boardroom, the break room, or in front of other staff or stakeholders. That is not the time or place to have this type of a conversation. Of course, in COVID times, if we're having these conversations remotely, I would strongly suggest that there's some kind of visual confirmation. So you're actually looking at each other through the webcams rather than like a telephone call or audio only, just so that you can really kind of see body language. And you can also share screens, and you're both looking at sort of the progressive corrective action document. If it's a verbal, like run through the 7 steps of the PCA in your mind before you have that conversation. Let that really be your guide to that conversation. If it's a written, I highly suggest, this works so well, go into the meeting having completed all the steps of the progressive corrective action. But if it's in person, only bring in the form with steps 1 and 2 filled out. Or if it's virtual, the one that you're sharing on your screen, you're showing on your screen, only show the one with steps 1 and 2 filled out. So this now allows you to work with the employee, to work together to complete the rest of the document and ask for their input. However, in the back of your mind, you've already worked it through, so you kind of know, okay, if the employee doesn't bring this up for one of their actions, then I'll bring it up. Or if the employee does, if I ask the employee, what actions can I take to best support you? If they don't bring something up that I thought of, then I can put that in. So you're not doing it sort of on the fly, and you're not doing things in the moment. Now, of course, we all do live in this perfect world, so tempers will never flare. People won't take things personally, but if things do get a little heated, take a break, cool down, set a time, come back, meet then. The most important thing that I can relay at this point is, honestly, it's not about the employee. It's not that the employee is bad. Really, this meeting is just about addressing the actions and behaviors of the employee, okay? So at the end of the day, it's progressive corrective action is not rocket science. This is rocket science. And hopefully systems like this are actually going to be bringing high-speed internet to rural and isolated communities all across the North and all across Canada. Hopefully in the next year or 2 years, we'll see. But it is about intervening at the right time and caring about your employees and setting them up for the best possible outcome. So I have done a lot of talking, but the overall takeaways: true cost. We've spoken about the true cost to employee termination and turnover. We've spoken about progressive corrective action in 3 ways that it's an effective approach to performance issues in the workplace. It helps you to identify and resolve the core issue, and it also allows you to work together collaboratively with your employee to address that core issue. So set yourself and your employee up for success. Work together to discover the core issues at hand. Develop and implement a plan of action. And then again, work together to resolve the behavior. So with that, I now get to take a drink of water here, and I welcome Tracy back.
And here I am. Thanks so much, Matt. I know 7% of you have found the questions box because my life is all about statistics this week. So if you haven't, it is on the right side of your screen. Please put your question in. And I've already got a few for you, Matt. So the first one is, what do you do if your management doesn't support termination? What can you do next? Oh, I know.
What do you do if management doesn't support termination? So I guess one of the first questions I would ask
Yes.
is, why are they not supporting termination? It could be, so a lot of the times in the past as a HR professional, what I've seen is, remember that slide where the leader frustration is like, that's it, I've had it. They need to pay out. They go to management and management's like, I don't support termination because I don't see evidence that you've made the effort to address the issues. We haven't set this employee up for success. So I'm sorry, I know your frustration is here. We have to pretend we're back in time. And that's just not a great situation to be in. Without any further details, I think that the key question is, why is management not in favor of termination? And I'm looking at termination in just sort of a general sense of exiting the employee from the company. So that could be severance, or so with cause or without cause. That's how I'm interpreting that.
Excellent, thanks. It really reinforces the importance of using the performance evaluation and these steps, even if you feel like they're not really useful, you might find them very useful later on. So definitely. What about bullying? Or behaviors that are really difficult to capture in the PCA? How would you adapt, or what would you be focusing on to really capture what's going on with the situation?
That's a really great question. And I mean, obviously, the example that we used with poor Elaine, I'm sorry to all the Elaines that are out there, except for those of you Elaines that showed up late to this webinar. So what I will say is, it's coming back to what is the actual, what I would do is, when you identify the issue, is identify a specific policy that you can to really identify. So maybe there is a treatment of employees policy that you have, or whatever you call that policy, that probably has harassment, discrimination, bullying as a part of that policy. So what you can do is you can say, the performance deviation is a breach of this policy. And then you can say, on this date, this employee felt that, we saw you bully and belittle an employee on this date, and et cetera, et cetera. And then if a different behavior pops up down the road during the course of the progressive corrective action, you can go back and say, we've got another instance where it deviates against this policy. So even though the behavior is different, kind of like with Elaine, well, first it was an alarm clock, then it was a tire, and then it was the car breaking down. Really, at the end of the day, it's she wasn't able to show up. So if you can attach it to a policy that encapsulates all of that with respect to bullying, that's the best approach. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. And this is related to the first question about, again, progressive corrective action, the idea that you might be stepping in and you've got someone who should have had some progressive corrective action done and not. So now you've got what you would call a problem employee, which is someone's quotes, not mine. But how do you adapt the process for new managers as they're stepping into that role and realizing that they may have a situation on their hands?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and that can be a really difficult situation for that manager to be in. So I think there's a couple of things. One is, I've seen sort of two takes, right? So one is, employee comes in, the manager has sort of had this sort of handover, there's a bit of a reputation from the employee about the employee, and the manager's like, I can take care of this, it's all good, and they just sort of continue business as usual, and then things go south quite quickly. Or you have a manager that says, okay, this is going to require time and effort that apparently my peers in the past have not been willing to put in, And we're going to do our very best to address this. So the first time this behavior comes up, the leader is going to have that conversation with the employee and state the expectations. And it comes down to onboarding as well. So just because they may not be new to a company, but maybe they're new to a team, as part of that onboarding process, you can actually go through and really set up the expectations for behavior and performance in this team, and make it very clear, answer as many questions as you can, and really set the employee up for success going forward. And then if you start to see the behaviors that you were maybe warned about, and the other leaders or other employees have said, yeah, that guy, he's, then you step in right away in a friendly manner, in a cooperative manner. You work your way through the 7 steps, and really it's about addressing those performance deviations. But it's not an easy fix for sure.
No, and I think another not easy fix is this COVID situation, because what I'm hearing anecdotally and what people are talking here about is the idea that maybe we're starting to see some performance behavior challenges that we weren't seeing in an office, but we might start to see relationship strained or performance management challenges. So one of the questions here is, how do you monitor employees' performance while working remotely without feeling like you're being a micromanager?
Yeah, that's a big one, and there's no kind of like catch-all answer that I can give. But what I can give is, I think it really comes down to workplace culture and trust, right? So obviously employees have been hired and are part of your team. There's a certain level of trust, hopefully, that the employee knows what they're doing and they can get their job done within the hours of work that you're asking them to do. Not all jobs can be easily quantified, so it's not like we're probably not working in a factory and we know that we've produced X number of widgets, right? Some of us are probably working in spreadsheets and then in Word documents and then filling out grant forms and all this kind of stuff. And so I think really what it comes down to is opening up the lines of communication with the employee and seeing what challenges they're having, and as a leader, what barriers you can remove. And hopefully building a level of psychological safety within the team that allows the employee to say, hey, I've got a problem. And they know that they can come to you or maybe another member of the team and address and air this problem without fear of reprisal. So I think really it just comes down to having these opening up communication as best as possible with the employees, and just kind of keeping an eye on the work and see how people are doing. I wish there was an easy way to track and maintain. I'm hearing horror stories of some organizations having webcams on all of their computers, and there's software that's tracking the employees' eyes and productivity while they're at their computer. And no, that is not a way to build a healthy workplace culture. And if anything, from the data that we've been seeing coming out of, doesn't matter if government or the private sector, and hopefully I haven't seen anything specifically around nonprofit, is that productivity has actually increased during this time of employees being able to work from home and work remotely. It's just a different era that we've sort of entered into, and it's uncomfortable because we've been used to like seeing employees come in, take their hat off, and not quite punch in, but come into work and do work. So I think it just, like I said, it boils down to trust, communication, and checking in and removing barriers.
Right. And so we've got one last question and then we'll sort of wrap up, but it's related to that, in that a lot of the progressive corrective action that people are seeing, or challenges that they're seeing in this time of COVID, are around things like mental health disclosures, challenges, as you said, with what's going on in your own home. Are there any tools or strategies that managers can use now, before progressive action would become a thing, to make sure that everybody's on that same page when it comes to orientation, when it comes to work expectations, when it comes to tracking work outcomes? I mean, I don't want to put a webcam on everyone's computer, obviously, but looking at Nobody wants that. But looking at something you can do before you get to that point of having to talk about progressive corrective action, especially again in a remote work situation.
Totally. If your organization is lucky enough to have some kind of employee family assistance program, what I would do is contact your EAP or EFAP provider and see if you can't have sort of like a mental health check-in with one of their professionals with your team. So that's one thing, right? Is setting up, knowing kind of what some warning signs might be, and really taking care of the mental health piece. From just health, whether that's mental health or physical health piece, I think it's really important for leaders to know that unless you have a medical degree, like you are an MD, we should not be asking for medical diagnoses or information, because it's really easy for us to make assumptions that, oh, I know someone in my family who is on the, is on the autism spectrum, and so I know how to deal with this employee who I think is on the spectrum, right? And it can just be awful consequences. So leave the medical piece up to the medical professionals, and allow medical professionals to provide you with any sort of workplace changes or that need to take place with respect to supporting that employee in the workplace. With respect to other bits and pieces is, again, there's an organization called IDEO, and they do a lot of design thinking, and they have this great blog called, I think it's called The Octopus. And a lot of the stuff that they've been talking about is around how to build trust and communication within your team. So one of the things that I'm encouraging clients of Human Elements is to really, again, work on this communication and to really build up this sense of trust in a time where we are not physically close to one another. And the more creative and better ways that you can do that, so that it actually reaches all of the different types of employees that you have, and we all have preferences with respect to communication, the better and stronger you're going to be for when there's an issue, when there's a couple pebbles at the top of the mountain that you need to deal with. If you have a very poor relationship with your employee and you have to broach something and it's going to blow up, the best thing that you can do before we get to those pebbles is to build those healthy relationships between employer and employee.
Great, thanks so much. If you want to flip us to the next slide, I'll just let folks know that if you didn't get your question answered, please come and check out the blog post. We'll talk about that in a second. There we go. Do you want to talk about maybe where we can reach you and maybe some next steps if people need some assistance? Absolutely.
Boy, look at that svelte Matt before the COVID snacking took over. So you can download the progressive corrective action templates just by visiting that URL. When you get the slides, this is it's an active link. The same thing as well, you can book a free, no obligation 30-minute call with Human Elements, and my email and my Twitter handle is there as well, should people find themselves there.
Excellent. And that actually dovetails in nicely into one of the questions we had, which was, will folks get the slides? Yes, you definitely will. You just keep an eye on your inbox for that. And as for CCVO, you can come and join us again on November 27th. We're having a Nonprofits at 2 event on government budgets and Alberta nonprofits, what to watch for in 2021. If you are a CCVO member, your ticket is free. All you need to do is register. If you're not a CCVO member, well, you need to join, because events like this are the reason that CCVO membership really is a value. You can head to calgarycvo.org to find out more about how to become a member. You can also find out more about our programs and events, and of course, recordings and blog posts from our past webinars, and in a few weeks, we'll have this one as well. And then thank you as well to our sponsors, Land Solutions and Altitude Communications, to the CCVO team who works behind the scenes to make great events like this happen, and to you, our audience, for spending this hour with us. All the best, until next time.